Good morning, everyone. So great to have you here with us today. We would like to welcome you to our MiTalks webinar. This week's session is called Amped Up, EV Technology and Local Infrastructure, featuring Jim Saber, the President and CEO of NextEnergy. We're so happy to have you here with us as we talk about these opportunities that are on the forefront. I'll get started with some introductions and a brief overview before handing it over to Jim. My name is Latricia Mitchell. I work with the Economic Growth Institute as a project manager and oversee these parts of the MiVTTP project. Let's get started with some introductions. This is our MiVTTP team. I call this a deep bench of folks that execute along this project from EGI and Michigan Clean Cities, which we'll learn a little bit more about as we get going. A little refresher on MiVTTP, which stands for the Michigan Vehicle Technology Transition Impact Project. This is a Department of Energy funded project over three years. We are currently in year 2 of 3, and overall, our program outcomes are to understand community needs and impacts of the EV transition, provide action plans for workforce training and technical assistance, support communities' responses to these unique challenges and opportunities, and overall promote higher job placement in MiVTTP communities. We serve 11 communities across Michigan: Detroit, Ecorse, Flint, Hamtramck, Lansing, Lincoln Park, Melvindale, Pontiac, River Rouge, Warren, and Wyandotte. That's a little bit about MiVTTP, and if you've been engaged in the process so far, it's really been a pleasure to partner with you as we serve communities across the state. Thank you. I see some introductions in the chat. That's wonderful. And as you do that, please continue to introduce yourselves and share your affiliation and what you're looking to learn in today's session. I see some wonderful and interesting ideas already in the chat. So please do use the space as well to network and get connected to other folks that could have some interesting insights for you. So I'm going to start by reading Jim's bio, and it is a wonderful one as we get acquainted together today. Good morning, Jim.
Morning.
Let me tell you a little bit about Jim today. Jim is the president and CEO of NextEnergy, which houses and staffs our MiVTTP partner organization, Michigan Clean Cities. NextEnergy is a dynamic Detroit-based nonprofit that works with innovators to accelerate smarter, cleaner, and more accessible solutions for communities and cities. Jim has led business and technology development efforts at NextEnergy, supporting commercialization for advanced energy clients. Jim has managed over $170 million in technology demonstration programs across e-mobility, smart grid, infrastructure, microgrids, energy storage, renewables, and alternative fuels. Wow. And has established platforms for next generation energy efficiency and transportation. Jim serves on the boards of the Detroit 2030 District and the Michigan Institute for Energy Innovation. He advises DTE's Emerging Technology Program, and Jim contributes to the Department of Energy's Vehicle and Hydrogen initiatives. Jim also serves on SAE committees for hydrogen and fuel cell standards. Previously, Jim worked over a decade in energy storage, leading product development at Duracell and technology development at Millennium Cell. So batteries are something Jim knows quite well. He holds a BS in electrical engineering from Lawrence Technological University. Good morning, Jim, once again. So thank you again for being here with us.
Good morning, Latricia, and thanks for having me. And I'm looking forward to a great discussion today.
Wonderful. I'll let you go ahead and get started as we talk about NextEnergy and Michigan Clean Cities.
Sure. Okay, so NextEnergy, our mission is really to work with innovators to accelerate smart, clean, and accessible solutions for communities and cities. We really see our work really being in the kind of that last mile of commercialization and getting a new solution out into the market. We provide access to testing platforms, deployment programs, and other activities, which I'll describe in more detail later, for companies to really understand how their solution works in the real world and what benefits and values it creates. We really, the NextEnergy side of that business is maybe a little more technical and a little more hardening of technology and hardening of solutions. And then on the Michigan, Clean City side of the house, we really focus on, yes, there's great technology, there's things that we can deploy that are going to meet our goals of a cleaner, stronger, smarter Michigan. But really kind of start that from the end user or the community side. Solutions and technologies are only great if people use them and people understand the value that they create for them. So we really try to blend yes, we'll help company X do this, but we really try to define what does the specific community that you want to engage with, what do they really think about your product? And so, we've been around for a long time, and we've had the wonderful experience of deploying energy and mobility technologies. And this slide's a little old. It's probably 35 to 40 Michigan communities. We're a relatively small organization. We, as a nonprofit, we act a little bit as a service provider or a consultancy. We're simply there to help things happen smoother, faster. We have a great team with many, many years of experience in manufacturing, product development, energy, mobility, finance, and community engagement. So it's a very diverse, small but diverse team that, really focuses on, the problems that we need to solve at the appropriate time. In talking about services, and I'm not going to go into all of these in detail, but really it gets into building public and private partnerships. Most of the work that we do, there's an equal investment by the private sector and public sector, and that can be from the state of Michigan or the federal government or even a community. And we do a number of projects that are consortium based, right? A group of companies wanting to see something move forward that we can all benefit from. And then on the the right side, it's what research do we have to do, what analysis do we have to do, and in order to be able to provide that information and deploy the technology as needed. So a lot of what we do are really based on innovation platforms. So our two kind of most publicly facing innovation platforms are the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, which is right smack dab between downtown Detroit and Michigan Central. And it's a real world parking garage where we operate multiple floors of the garage as a test lab and a demonstration site. So it's a mirror of things that we can do behind a fence and help companies test and demonstrate technology. And then things that, on purpose, we can blend those technologies and those solutions to provide more data information because they now have to commingle with, uncontrolled environments. Autonomous vehicles, think of self-parking cars when you get to a parking facility, different ways to charge an electric vehicle, and that the kind of first and last mile logistics. How do we use the rooftop of the lab to maybe take a package from a drone and get that package, in an emissions-free and seamlessly connected manner to wherever it needs to go. The Urban Tech Exchange is a smart buildings and smart communities platform. We have a lot of deployments and projects around building system automation, energy demand management. So how are we, we have a smart kitchen and a smart living room, and we'll actually have two smart kitchens in the space and a smart living room. And we have smart restrooms and other things where we are gathering data, information, and user experience as to how are these solutions going to impact impact the life of everyone on a day-to-day basis. I would say that the common threads of these types of platforms is integration into a real world environment. We have to go through every step that anyone would take in order to get the technology installed, permitted, and operational. So there's a lot of experience that people learn, and in many cases, they're deploying these solutions in a space that's not their own for the first time. So they learn quite a bit about these deployments. Both are designed to be turnkey, real world demonstration environments. The vast majority of the companies that use these are startup companies, but we also have a number of partnerships with large corporates who may be bringing something to the market themselves or just want to work with a startup. I think the big thing that, to take away from this slide is that while we may provide through the sponsors of these platforms some funding to a company to help them deploy their tech, it's not there's no equity investment. We're not taking a position in the company. We're not trying to take a position with their IP. They're designed to be truly open, and they're designed to, have competitors, testing and demonstrating in the same environment. So we truly try to make these open platforms. So how are they funded? On the corporate side, relationships with, Bosch, Ford, Cisco, Code Labs. We've had investment from Denso and General Motors and Stellantis into projects that we have worked there. And then the government side, the platforms, can receive support from the Office of Future Mobility and Electrification, which has supported the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, and GEM, the Global Epicenter of Mobility Program, which is run by the Detroit Regional Partnership. They've provided resources into the parking lab, and then the City of Detroit and the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy have provided resources into the Urban Tech Exchange. Kind of a list of companies that are deploying or have deployed there. I would really kind of, if you want to look up companies after this or find out more, Alba Robot builds an autonomous electric wheelchair that is being deployed in a number of scenarios around airports and communities. It's Electric and VoltPost are doing wonderful work to, bring EV charging to the curbside. And Ion Dynamics Energy and Joule Labs are, kind of focused on how do I bring that charger to the vehicle versus the vehicle to the charger. UTX, the Urban Tech Exchange examples, you see a lot of companies that you would recognize, very quickly: Bosch, Kohler, Sloan, Cisco. But there's a lot of other startups here that are doing really innovative work on, what's the next generation kitchen, what's the next generation recycling, to repurpose, food waste into useful products, like Ecosphere. Lotus, which is developing solutions that are specifically designed for people with disabilities in our aging population. We might be less mobile. How do we make things that we need to access mobilely more convenient for us? So, thinking about the talk today and some of the questions that Latricia and Carmen asked me in prep for this, I wanted to kind of really focus on a couple of areas in smart mobility. Is how do we maximize the investment and also at that same time increasing on-demand services? So, on the far left of the screen, it looks like a big robot or box cart that says Ion on it, and that Ion is an autonomous vehicle that acts as a DC fast charger. It also can act as a emissions-free standby or backup generator. It can be connected to the grid so that you could do demand response and virtual power plant applications. And so it's truly in the utility world, a distributed energy resource. We like it because if you want to invest in DC fast charging, you need a lot of transformers, you need a lot of switchgear, you need a lot of capital to invest behind the scenes, the things that the consumer never touches. And that can be overwhelming and time consuming. With products like Ion and Joule Labs, which I mentioned before, you can really, start to connect these systems to existing infrastructure, single phase circuits, and what you already have, and start to provide these services. So, it's a great kind of example of how would we maximize investment and increase on demand. Because if I can bring the charger to the vehicle, either in a parking structure or at the curbside, I'm increasing the likelihood that someone will be able to leverage the full value of an EV. The far right side here, two examples: Volt Post, which is the big box type thing that looks like it's wrapped around a street light, because it's wrapped around a street light. And so they take existing infrastructure and are able to install and create opportunities to charge electric vehicles in the in the public with minimal investment. You're not running new wires, you're not digging, installing new transformers. You're leveraging what is existing already, and then able to bring that to the curbside. To the lower right is a project from It's Electric, and It's Electric, curbside charging, partnerships with cities, partnerships with communities, but another way to get, and business owners or property owners, because they can connect their solutions through a third party or another company's meter, are great examples of how do we increase opportunities for EV charging in communities, in cities, in places where we do not have a lot of infrastructure for charging, and increase the uptake of EVs. The two in the middle, I think, are like really cool active projects right now. Up in the top, you see a number of people in what are automated wheelchairs that are actually moving and right now are deployed at Detroit Metro Airport. This is using electrification, using autonomy to increase the services that could be provided at an airport. So think of these as like, I may not need a lot of TLC, but I might struggle from walking from gate 72 to gate 10 at Detroit Metro Airport, right? You need some assistance. These robots or these wheelchairs can tether each other so they can follow each other. You can still have an attendant walking next to the person in the wheelchair, but they can move through the space in an autonomous manner. And then that really frees up the resources for these service providers to spend the most time with the people who need the most help, right? The last one here says Penny Pickup, another electrified automated vehicle that we are using in the city of Detroit right now to collect specific compostable food waste from restaurants, and then bringing that back to a conversion facility at the Urban Tech Exchange, to where that waste is turned into value-added products for the restaurant. So another way of using mobility, smart technology, zero emissions technology to improve services in an urban area. So another thing that that Latricia asked me in prep for this is like, okay, so how do we like bridge the gaps? Companies have great ideas, they have solutions that they think they're ready to go, and how do we get them to where they could be fully realized? On the private sector side, every project that we engage with at the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, the Urban Tech Exchange, and like the Michigan Mobility Funding Platform, which is more of a statewide program, we help with permitting, getting technology installed, understanding how it's going to work and what's the scope of work for how can we collect the right data to prove out the technology. And we're typically doing this, or they're doing it for the first time in a public real world environment. So it's, we're trying to get it to work exactly the way that they want it and to provide the value. So it's a very much a hands-on approach. And then the other, support that we provide in these programs is really how do we help these companies identify, new use cases, new opportunities for them to market their products, realize all the benefits, and then hopefully develop new partners along the way. When you're able to bring companies into the Detroit Smart smart parking lab, and they're able to get in front of Bedrock or Ford or large companies. A lot of times those companies, the larger ones take a liking to the smaller company, and then they create those partnerships to help them move forward. On the public sector side, it's really really working with communities to understand, how do these solutions, how can they be integrated into new or improved public services? Ultimately, we are looking to deploy solutions that solve problems, right? And we start with the problem. We don't start with the solution looking for a problem to solve. And so, for this to work the right way and for them to, for these to be sustainable, these solutions have to improve the quality of life for people who live, work, and visit our communities. And if we can focus on that, and the cities and the communities understand that, then they can provide stronger services.
Thank you so much, Jim. And Jim's last slide is talking a little bit about the barriers to EV adoption. And I want to encourage the listener to be thinking about your community and your particular barriers to EV adoption. Be curious about how you might be able to tackle some of those. Thank you, Jim. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Patricia. And when you think of barriers to adoption, I'm really, really interested in the audience's take on this, because we live this every day. And, I'm really proud to say that like half of our team drives electric vehicles. So maybe we're early adopters and maybe we've overcome some of these barriers, but we don't always think that they're barriers anymore, right? So really want to hear from others on this. But if I take, the cost out of the equation for an EV, when we think of urban areas and what we've experienced, is we have challenges with lack of locations for EV chargers, right? I mean, and the vast majority of people who drive EVs will charge their vehicle. I charge my vehicle a couple of times a week in my own garage, right? So I have zero, I have no issues accessing infrastructure, and it's mine. I paid for it. And I don't have to let anyone else use it, and it's there for me 7 days a week. If you live in a high-rise apartment, if you live in a condo, if you live, in an older community where you do not have a garage, how do you, that's that personal, individually owned charging stations that we struggle with, and it's harder to adopt the technology there. And then, really on the urban side, when you think of infrastructure, it's, the city of Detroit is much more likely to have older infrastructure than the city of Troy or the city of Rochester Hills, right? Newer communities have the latest technology, and much more easily adaptable to the loads that we're seeing from electric vehicles and other highly electrified applications. So that's another challenge that we have, and if you're a city and you're looking to deploy this, you have to work closely with your utility. You have to work closely with other partners to understand where am I going to get the best financial return if I start to invest in these technologies. And a lot of that has to do with what infrastructure upgrades might be required. Rural, areas, quite frankly, when I think of infrastructure, you have many more miles of wire per customer than you do in an urban or suburban community. So, one of the reasons why energy or electricity, it's a big reason why energy or electricity is more expensive in rural areas. I just have, many more wires per customers. The other thing that, is a challenge in rural areas is, and I think this is probably where range anxiety is the most real, right? If you have 20 or 30 miles or whatever in between, communities that you might be driving to, with limited infrastructure, 20 to 30 miles may not be that big of a deal, but 150 miles or whatever. The big thing is that in rural areas, we don't always get to take full advantage of the electric vehicle and the efficiencies of the electric vehicle. So you don't have regenerative braking. You don't have, you have long distances where you're driving at steady state, versus kind of the start stop, which doesn't necessarily hurt the EV, but it doesn't really allow it to maximize its potential. And so that's really where the range anxiety, comes in. And in smaller, more rural communities, the public sector is a little more hesitant to invest in charging because if you're the city and you're entrusted with the public's resources, you want to make sure that those resources are going to be leveraged and used. So there's a little bit of nervousness, I would say, in a lot of community sides to invest in the technology because they want to make sure it's going to be used before they make that investment. Suburban areas, we have a lot of the same issues, but they're much more easily solved for. The infrastructure is more easy to adapt. We seem to have way more or many more chargers in suburban areas than urban or rural. And it's probably a little more easily adaptable to an electric vehicle.
Thank you so much, Jim. We're
So
gonna.
I'm expecting everyone in the audience to give me a couple of barriers and things that I haven't thought of yet. So
We're
they're a
gonna
little
do.
challenge for everyone.
Thank you. So we're gonna move ahead to some question and answer. I have many questions, but I also believe and expect that y'all might have a few in the audience. So I'll take just a moment. You can give those out in the chat, or you can come off of mute and share your question verbally that way. A few different options for engagement here. And stop sharing so that we can see and hear each other a little bit better.
Good afternoon. I have one question, or two actually. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm Chief Hunter, Detroit Fire Marshal Division. So with your smart parking and mobility, the question is, are these smart parking structures going to be newly built, or are you going into structures that are already there? Because we're working on an ordinance now. We're looking at charging locations and distance, and also parking structures that are currently in existence were built for a certain weight load. And as you know, EV batteries or EV vehicles, I think those batteries add an extra 1,000 pounds to the vehicle. Mm-hmm. So have you taken these things into consideration?
Well, that's a fantastic question. And I'd say the answer is yes, and kind of like yes to everything on this. I mean, we do know EVs are heavier. If you, I think one thing about parking structures is, we have a lot of old ones, and a lot of old ones that were designed and operable, for 50, 75 years, and do not have the electrical infrastructure to support a lot of EV charging. Most of them really weren't designed to support parking of an F-250 or a really big pickup truck. And if you go to a parking structure at any time, it seems like half the parking spots are filled up with large trucks, right? So we have issues with movement throughout the parking structures, and how do we ensure safety and other things, especially when we have bigger vehicles. Weight's an issue that we have to solve for. Electrical infrastructure is an issue. In the case of the Detroit Smart Parking Lab, a relatively new facility, less than 10 years old, but it wasn't designed to be a parking lab. It was designed to be a parking garage and a parking structure. So we had to make modifications along the way to do what we want to do. I would say that you really kind of have to look at kind of two pathways, right? One is if I'm starting from scratch, or an undeveloped piece of property, there's a lot of things that you can do up front to make it smarter, to make it more accessible, to make it to have that investment last much longer. And if you're like going in a retrofit or repurposing the facility, you can do a lot of things, but you have to be very careful in how you plan them and how you operate them in order to maximize their potential. I think and that's everything from, the power infrastructure, the communications infrastructure in these facilities is very important too, because we want them to be smart and we want them to be connected. And quite frankly, if you're in a parking structure where in order to be able to support the weight of these vehicles, you typically have 1 to 2 feet of reinforced concrete floors and all that. Wireless technology does not move very well through that, right? So there's barriers, there's things that, we want to have that seamless experience from the entry point to the exit point. And, those are also challenges that we learn about as we deploy new solutions.
All right, thank you. And the last question is, and I'll leave my contact information in the chat. As we work on this this ordinance for Detroit, we also looked at how many EV stations we would want per floor, how close together they would be, and we were not particularly wanting them to be in a basement, because we had to think about the firefighting aspect of it. If you're at a lower level or 2 levels below grade, that could cause some issues also. So just some things to consider. And if you have considered that, then, I'd like to hear about that also. But I'll leave my contact information.
Yeah, I appreciate it. And I mean, I'd love to follow up and we can talk in detail. I mean, we've had to address a lot of these things, and we've had a number of like best practices conversations with authorities having jurisdiction, not only just in, Southeast Michigan, but across the country, so that, when we think of these solutions, we would love there to be standards as to, we all could feel comfortable we're going to treat some issue the same way and respond to it. We're closer to where we want to be, but we're not there yet. And so really, having the city of Detroit, and we work closely with the Office of Mobility Innovation and other folks in the city, having the city engaged is a wonderful opportunity for us. And it's a great opportunity for, Michigan to show leadership in this space. So, again, I'll follow up with you offline, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see a comment here from Chris that there are plenty of examples of charging infrastructure in underground parking garages. Right. It's very encouraging. Do you have some other questions? I have one that I'd love to ask. So while you were discussing some of these innovation opportunities, I was thinking about this for our community. So you showed us some examples of tools and infrastructure that can be used without involving the consumer. And I'm wondering, is that what you would recommend as the next steps to communities whose residents are either skeptical of or don't have a lot of financial inroads to personal EV ownership, to just to begin to also just pursue some of these other models?
I'm not 100% sure I understand your question. Can you?
Yeah. So you mentioned with like the Ion, for example, the Ion tool, that the consumer doesn't interact with that tool, but it benefits the city or the community or whomever is implementing such the tool. And I'm wondering, is that a good next step for some communities where maybe on the community level, folks do not feel ready or do not feel like they have access to EVs? But we're wanting all these communities as a part of MiVTTP really also to have some meaningful next steps towards the EV infrastructure so that they're ready. Would that be a good next step, or where would you recommend that they start?
I think on a community level, I would probably, I think everything starts with like community and public engagement, right? If you're at the city level or the community level, you want to make sure that what you're doing and what you're planning to do is actually going to help make someone's life easier, improve their quality of life, and when at all possible, do no harm. And what I mean by like do no harm is, no unintended consequences, and we want those minimized, right? The the things that, like on the ION side, yes, it's infrastructure that can be operated privately, in a privately held parking garage, in a public surface lot, in a number of different things. Still, at the end of the day, with that, the end user, the person who needs their vehicle charged has to plug it in, and so they have to engage with it a little bit, right? The community engagement side of these things is like, are these technologies and solutions that we want in our communities, right? How will the consumer, interact, or just the general public interact with it? How are we thinking about operations and safety and training, right? It's a new device, it's a new system. What's the piloting? What are the operating requirements, procedures that we would want to have in place so that the consumers would get the value that they want of it? And then, kind of, to Mr. Hunter's questions, like, how do we engage, the first responders, into these things? Because people are, in general, one of the things I think about is, like, a lot of people are, hesitant about new technology. I was talking the other day with a colleague, and we were talking about, autonomous vehicles. And most EVs today, and you'll see it, whether it's a Ford or GM vehicle, there's Super Cruise or, Blue Cruise or whatever they call it, that would allow a vehicle to operate in an autonomous manner in certain roads. I tried it, and gosh, I got to tell you, I freaked out. It was like, it was just a really weird experience for me. And I've only used it once since, right? And if there's someone that probably should have been like, oh, I got this, it's like, this should have been me. I mean, we've tested these things in many different environments, but when push came to shove, I was uncomfortable with it. People are uncomfortable with new solutions. And so, what's the right engagement? What's the right training? What's the right programming that allow them to be comfortable?
Wow. So in some ways, taking the time to really slow down, to check in on every level of a community as shifts are being made is really essential.
Oh, yeah.
Through, who fits it. And maybe solutions will present themselves as you hear about the problems and sort of align that with current innovation opportunities. That's really wonderful. Thank you, Lauren. Great comment. Other questions? Of course, I have a few, but I'm always curious for you all what you're thinking. I'll give you a few moments to generate any thoughts that you might have. And I have a question for you about EV investment that I'll also put in the chat.
Okay.
What advice would you give to communities seeking to attract investment or pilot new EV and clean energy technologies? You showed us lots of partners that engaged around DSPL and UTX, and I'm curious what advice you would give to communities that are looking to begin this process.
I think one of the first things that I would think about, and this is kind of amazing. I was on a panel earlier this morning at the Mobility Innovation Exchange, and I got a very similar question. So I should have a pretty well reversed answer here. But if I'm at the community level and I'm at the public infrastructure level, I think I really would be focused on what are the base level investments that a community or city could put in place that are going to, one, like, last a really long time, right? And two, that are going to make it easier for, the companies with the new technology, the new solutions, make it easier for them to deploy in the manner that we think about. We don't run power lines every day. We don't lay pipe every day, underneath our roadways and, for stormwater management and all these things. And a lot of this is like, you want to make sure that you get that, the energy requirements, the backbone of what you want to invest in and look at, right the first time. And it really, so years ago when EVs, were first coming out, we talked to a lot of companies and cities too that said, I want to make my city EV ready, and I want to start with my parking lots and parking facilities. And our advice at that point, because there were so few vehicles out there, was like, make sure you run conduit everywhere, right? Because if you run conduit everywhere now, you can run the wires after. You can get, you don't have to dig up, concrete. You don't have to retrench. You don't have to do all these things. And so, how do we make on the public side this infrastructure that infrastructure that we don't want to, buy it twice. And so I think that's a big thing. And whether it's for EVs or community storage or community solar, it's that same type of thing. Am I creating from what I can control as a city, the right backbone and kind of like playground for these things to happen? It is kind of like, if you build it, they will come. If you build the right infrastructure and you make it easier for someone to deploy, you buy down their risk, and you increase their return on investment. And so there's a large number of examples where, others have been able to really leverage strategic infrastructure in communities to offer new services.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks, Jim. I have a question that I've intuited from someone else's comment that I'd like to make space for them to either ask or for us to just chat about briefly. Jasmine Dancy, who's a partner of ours, she mentioned in one of her reasons why she joined this webinar today, curious about what resources and funding are available for communities to upgrade and implement EV infrastructure. I'm curious, maybe Jasmine, if that question has been answered from your perspective, or if there's more that we could learn about that opportunity.
Would always love some more recommendations, so that'd be great.
Okay. I think that, we're in a, we're in a much different environment, in September of 2025 than we were in September of 2024. Right? And so that does not mean that, public investment is going away completely. Anyone who has been in this space that's worked with the federal government, over years have seen like, okay, well, this is the first time I experienced this or experienced that, with respect to a program or an investment that the Department of Energy or Department of Transportation would want to make. So I think, but it hasn't gone away. There still are a number of state programs and state research, primarily through EGLE, the Department of Environment, Great Lakes and Energy, that are available to communities for electric vehicle infrastructure, for renewable energy investments, for smart grid investments, et cetera. The Michigan Public Service Commission also has some programs out in that space. So there still are, resources available, from at the state level, and in some cases, on the federal level, to help invest in these solutions. But I'd say that, we've moved pretty far down a path here. And another area to look at is to, there are like service providers and aggregators that would be available that are in the marketplace. And when I say like aggregator, some entity that would say, I will co-invest with you and I will provide you a turnkey solution. So that can be, turnkey solutions on charging infrastructure. It can be turnkey solutions on fleet analysis tools and fleet operation tools and all that. So, those opportunities continue to grow and kind of continue to get us to where, we're kind of buying down the cost of transitioning to electric vehicles and minimizing, the risk. So, do some investigation on, even if you're part of the public sector now and you have a city that has a fleet and they have a fleet, service provider and all that, that would also be like maybe the first stop to shop, because they probably have some tech and some solutions that could be leveraged for EVs as well.
Thank you.
Wonderful. I see another question here from Chris. Good to see you, Chris, from Gasserbush. Where do you see infrastructure in EU and China 5 years and 10 years ahead? Do you think that you see this gap widening or closing in the next 10 years? If you have anything to add there.
Okay, now we're getting into it here. So and I think the EU and China, I think right now, yes, they're ahead of where we are in infrastructure. And China ahead, we can say because it's a closed market, or the government has more freedom to do what they want to do versus the private sector, and those things are true. I mean, they can will themselves to be what they want to be. I think the European Union is ahead of us on this, and primarily when you look at the European Union, you're talking about a lot of countries where, in many cases, natural resources are scarce. So they're not sitting over large, deposits of natural gas or oil, and they've had to solve problems differently, and maybe they don't want to purchase their fossil fuels from their neighbors, right? So they're farther ahead than we are in some of these strategic investments. They also have, different needs than we may have. I certainly don't think we're doing ourselves any favor by, as a country, like on a federal policy, by kind of pausing or maybe taking steps backwards. The rest of the world's going to continue to go down this path, and we could strategically put ourselves at a disadvantage if we go down a path that puts us on an island. And so hopefully that's not too controversial or whatever, but I think it's something that we always have to be aware of. We live in a world with global companies, and we have a ton of global companies, in the state of Michigan. They're global companies because they sell and manufacture their products all around the world. If we think of where investments are going to go, the investments are going to go in the markets, in the regions that they are going to be, that they're going to be able to leverage those investments and be most successful. And that's a real risk for us as a country. So Chris, I don't know if I answered your question or maybe created a few more, but I think that's we're at we'll pretty quickly be getting to an inflection point.
Wonderful. And I think Chris will let us know if we got it. Thank you so much. I think that was our last question for now. Unless there are some lingering ones, this is the time. I will give y'all a few minutes of breath to think about that. If you have any further questions, in terms of next steps today, we are just so grateful to have you, Jim, and really what a pleasure it is to continue to work with NextEnergy and Michigan Clean Cities on the MiVTTP program. I would say the biggest next steps after talking with Jim, we thought about, well, what should we promote if we were to promote anything from this time? We want to encourage you to get involved in this process. No matter where you might be, if you are a part of a MiVTTP community, there are ways for you to engage and participate in next steps to support that community. Or if you're a provider, just like Chris is doing in the comments here, if you're someone who's connected and thinking about these resources, ask how you can help. Be willing to connect other people to resources and really reject that scarcity mindset, because there is enough to go around somehow. We want to believe that. There's a lot going on right now, but we like to believe that still. Yeah, so we're grateful for your partnership. Be on the lookout, of course, for our upcoming events. I want to make space for you, Jim. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us as we transition today? Any final thoughts?
I guess if I had one final thought, and if you talk about like, in communities and all that, I hopefully, the examples and the products or texts that I described, give people things to think about, because one thing you didn't see in any one of those slides was a consumer-based electric vehicle. Right? There are all different types of things that are electrified, that are supporting this industry. I think that, as we think about like the autonomous wheelchair and electrified wheelchair, there are so many people in our communities where that wheelchair is their mobility, and so what other options, what are the things that we can be doing? What can we be doing that might leverage that option that they have that creates greater accessibility to another option, right? It's not always just about, can I put, how many cars can I get on the road? We'd love to have more electric vehicles on the road, right? But it's like, what are the other solutions? What are the other things that are going to make it easier and, more impactful for people, and like the little tiny robots that might be able to deliver products and services and other things to people who have mobility challenges. It's another way of solving a problem. So when you're, when you're out there in the community and you're thinking about what could be available to help people, there's lots of solutions, and it's not like, and feel free to be imaginative, right? I mean, because if there's somebody out there working on a tech for that. So I would just encourage people to be really open as to what kinds of solutions and what kind of services what we would want to provide in our communities.
Wow. That's a great place to wrap it. That's so encouraging. Dare to dream. Thank you all so much. We look forward to staying in touch. Please feel free to share any follow-up questions. If you'd like to connect with Jim, you can let us know and we'll get you in touch. Thanks you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.